There are going to be people who reject an expansion of this canon thing for many reasons. And that's fine. And I think for every one of those people, there are 20 or 40 or 60 new people who can now enter in because there's something that opens a doorway for them.
I'm Joel Bognar, and this is Living the Creative Life. Today's guest is pianist Lara Downs. Lara, it's a delight to welcome you onto the show. We've been wanting to have you on forever and ever. And so here we are in Porto, Portugal for Porto Piano Fest, and we're catching you here. Yeah. And thanks for joining me on the day of your recital. Whenever I look at your musical life and trajectory, it always strikes me that you've done things your own way.
From the beginning, the music itself, I loved. I loved the sound of it. I loved the feel of it. I loved so much about the history of it, and I was not included in that history. So many parts of myself, and that was fine. Practicing the piano in rooms that were lined with portraits of old bearded white men from other centuries was fine. I was completely prepared to spend my entire life feeling outside of that, in a personal way, and making my way into it by virtue of, my commitment to the music. And the moment I discovered that I didn't have to do that I could combine those two things, everything felt better.
Lara, I'm intrigued by your many themed albums. You've chosen very specific and meaningful subjects. I want to talk about the one that you're performing here at the Porto Piano Fest, which is derived from your album Love at Last. Mm-hmm. So tell me about this project, how it came to be, and how you assimilated this huge list of composers. I'm noticing composers from, among other places, Ukraine and Afghanistan. So I kind of get the sense of what's being included. For people who are coming to the experience of listening to this, is this just going to be, oh, that's a serious album, that's catharsis, and we're supposed to be changed? Is it all heavy and dark?
It's super heavy, and, it will change the world. No, this is, I think, actually, I don't know how to put this. What this music does is it goes to the heartbeat of, anyone, anywhere, regardless of the noise outside, the chaos outside. It's really just about the daily business of being human. So, when I was putting this album together, all manner of terrible things were happening in the world. We were, at a certain point in the pandemic, but there was still a pandemic. There was the war starting in Ukraine. There were wildfires ravaging everywhere. There was just violence. Oh, there was violence. The gun violence in our country. I mean, it was really getting to that point where to look at the news felt so toxic. And yet, when you looked at the news, when you looked sort of below the headline, when you looked at what was happening, in the cities of Ukraine, what you saw was a mom, gathering together the teddy bear that her child was going to need, in the evacuation shelter. You just saw people going about their lives however they needed to. I think what the music on this record illustrates is that those core experiences remain the same. We fall in love, we grieve, we laugh, we cry, no matter what's happening outside. One of the pieces on the record is Sleepers Awake by Bach, which is based on a hymn from the turn of the 17th century by the pastor of a small German town, where everyone was dying of the plague. But really, I can't think of a piece of music on this record that doesn't have beauty and a current of hope within it. It was driving me crazy that people kept talking about unprecedented times. That was ridiculous.
Yes, that's not true. Simply
completely untrue. Right? Maybe during your lifetime this is unprecedented, but look at the span of history. There have been plagues before, there have been wars before, there has been all kinds of human awfulness before. Maybe we haven't destroyed the planet to this extent before, but so all of that, was pulling together this collection of music that spoke to the shared experience of being human. And then I decided to turn that into an album, and I had just entered this relationship with Pentatone, and that was going to be my first project with them. So one day I'm sitting in my house, and there was this song that was running through my head that I was remembering from when I was a kid in Temple Emmanuel in San Francisco. And we had the cool rabbi with the guitar who would teach us these songs that we would sing in our youth group. It sounds much more religious than it was. It was just
cool
kind of
rabbi.
a fun social thing. And this song, I remembered how it started, "Laugh at all my dreams, my dearest." And I really couldn't remember beyond that. So I do this internet search and I find the song. I find some other rabbi who's singing the song on a Zoom service. And then I called Jeremy Siskind, who's an amazing pianist and jazz pianist and arranger, composer. And I said, "Jeremy, do you remember this song from Temple?" And he said, "Of course, that's Debbie Friedman." Feminist songwriter in the 1970s. He wrote all these songs that kind of informed the next generation of, very liberal Reform Judaism. Anyway, so I find the song, I find the text. It turns out that the text for this song came from a 19th century Ukrainian poet named Shaul Chernyakhovsky, who's considered sort of the father of Hebrew poetry. He emigrated to Jerusalem. So in the 1890s, he writes this poem that goes, "Laugh at all my dreams, my dearest. Laugh, and I repeat anew that I still believe in man as I still believe in you. Let the times be dark with hatred. I believe in years beyond, love at last will bind all people in an everlasting bond." And goosebumps on so many levels, But that idea, the times were dark. This man was about to live through 2 world wars and see the worst possible things that, anyone can imagine. But we will prevail, we will survive by virtue of connecting to each other, of, just love, like the little things that you do for us to help each other, to pull ourselves out of whatever darkness we're in.
So then, moving along to the music that you now champion, if we're talking about this sense of discovery, I love this theme of this sense of discovery. So you talk about composers and musicians who were historically underrepresented. What do you feel like when people say that there are these great undiscovered masterpieces?
It was probably 20 years ago, honestly. There was an anthology that I found in a library called 100 Years of Music by Black Women Composers. 100 years, there are about 12 pieces of music in the book. So, and the first piece that I started playing was the first Fantasie Negre by Florence Price. And I got to say right now, and I don't know that I've ever thought this through carefully, had that not been a spectacular piece of music, would I be where I am now? Would that have opened up this whole world to me? I don't think so. It was that piece of music was so staggeringly wonderful, and it spoke to me in a profound way. It was a sound. It was a musical amalgam that I hadn't experienced before. And the very first times that I started to play this music for audiences, I experienced this collective, joy and excitement.
What about the people, maybe they're out there, that they feel like, oh, well, if it's not very well known, if it's not been discovered, maybe it's just not very good?
They are all over the place out there, those people. But I think one thing that we are understanding in our time across the board, forget about classical music, is that history is a matter of who tells the stories, right? What we know is only what's been handed down to us, what's been fed down to us, what's been written down, and who got to write it and who got listened to. So there's so much we don't know about. I feel like the world is full of things to unearth from the past that are as beautiful and precious as the things that have been well preserved.
For an audience who hasn't heard it before, the Clara Schumann Piano Concerto versus the story of a composer like Florence Price, does the difference in their stories inform a different experience of performing them?
So I think that these stories, they all come together. Really, in the end, all they teach me is that we all have our voices and we all have this incredible power of, no matter what our circumstances are, that voice can create something beautiful and lasting and loud and, and powerful and connective. I was in Texas doing a residency at Southwestern University, and my host there, Dr. Michael Cooper, who's a musicologist, took me out to dinner the first night, and I said over dinner, you know what bugs me is that there's got to be so much more piano music down in those boxes in Arkansas. A few weeks later, he called me and he said, you know, I've got some research funds and I've got a little time. I'm going down there to check it out. So he went down to Fayetteville and started going through those boxes, which really had not been very much touched ever since they'd been brought down there in 2009 when all the manuscripts were discovered, you know, in this abandoned house in the countryside in Illinois. So he starts going through the boxes and he's just taking screenshots of these, you know, crumpled up, torn up, mildewed sheet music, and he was sending them to me. So I've had the experience of playing these things, you know, fresh out of obscurity and really, honestly feeling that I was bringing them back into the world.
Florence Price has seen a lot of airtime these days. As I believe rightly she should have her wonderful music be performed and heard. What's your observation about the perceived reactions of this music and how much it's being played today?
That was now 6 years ago, and I proposed albums of this music to some major labels, and nobody was interested. I mean, really, this renaissance has been so recent and so quick, but I can't process that because I've been invested in this music. So I understand some of the reasons that we're now championing Florence Price, you know, on the grand stage. But for me, there are several fascinating things about Florence Price. She wrote some really wonderful, you know, world-class music. She also wrote a lot of music to pay the bills and as teaching pieces, and she was aware of that. She never stopped. The woman had more drive and tenacity and ambition than I can imagine having in 100 lifetimes, you know, through all of her personal troubles and all of the rejections and challenges that she faced from the very, you know, closed gates of the classical music world at that time. She kept writing music, and that to me is what's really powerful about her, is what I was saying before about this voice that cannot be silenced. And, you know, when it comes to Clara, the same thing. I think, you know, she was just kind of unstoppable. And she had so much to say, and she just went ahead and, you know, and said it the best she could, given everything else that was clamoring for her time and her energy.
How do you give people a point of entry in considering what is clearly not just the music, but the stories of the composers?
I don't know how I do it except to share my own genuine excitement and joy about this. I know, I mean, it's funny. At this point, I know that what I do is a little off. Like, it's not what everybody does. But it's what I know how to do. It's what I feel. There are several things that happen in these encounters with something new, you know, and it can be with an institution like the Philadelphia Orchestra. So first of all, there's this sense of joy and discovery among the orchestra musicians, you know, who really say things like, thank you for bringing us this music. This is why I make music, you know, and that's something really gratifying, to be part of a collective experience of something that's, you know, new to the repertoire. And then there's this audience of subscription concert goers who love the orchestra, who love the repertoire, who also, you know, fall in love with this piece because it's a really, really good piece of music, because it's a good piece of music. And then there's the third thing, which is that, you know, we go out into the community and I introduce this music to a lot of listeners who don't make their way into the concert hall, and especially to young people, and especially to a lot of young people of color, and who are discovering this music and understanding how it relates to their own history, how it, you know, includes their lived experience, how they are immediately feeling a sense of belonging to this lineage, that sense of belonging that I didn't have when I was a little kid. And all three of those things are intensely valuable, and I mean, I just feel so privileged to be kind of the linchpin of making them happen.
Let's say that someone comes up to you and says, I don't understand why you played that. Is there something that you would say to them to encourage them in any way or other?
I don't think that we have to like force people to appreciate this music. It's like a numbers game for me. There are going to be people who reject an expansion of this canon thing for many reasons. And that's fine. And I think for every one of those people, there are 20 or 40 or 60 new people who can now enter in because there's something that opens a doorway for them. I always think about this one concert in particular. This was the night after the 2016 election. So I had gotten up at 3 a.m. from my house in California and flown to Louisville. And I had a concert that night, and it was just weird being out in the world that day. You know, there was a sense that we had entered into a new space. Everybody was treading on eggshells, and there was this sense that, you know, there was this division that had just, this like dividing line that, I don't know, I wasn't great. And I was playing music from my album America Again. So I think that evening I was probably careful to tell more stories than usual about all these composers who had come from so many different backgrounds, you know, men and women and black and white and gay and straight and immigrants and people who were born here, and just really, this is America and we are all connected. And I played this concert, and at the end there was a talk back, and there was a gentleman who was sitting in the back of the room, and he stood up and he said, my wife wants me to say to you, but she was sitting there and she was in tears. She couldn't speak. And he said, look at me again. He said, she wants me to tell you that your music makes her feel hope. And then in the front row was a family, and there's a young man, part of this family, and he stood up, he said, my family and I were undocumented, and your music made us feel like we belong here. And I can't tell that story without getting emotional. And it just, you know, you don't realize every day the power of what you are bringing and who might be listening. And then I think, okay, and so who's listening on the radio? Who's listening that I will never meet, who might be so touched and so moved and so changed?
Exactly.
Sorry.
And that's why we're doing this, because I don't know who we reach, and hopefully it's people who will find meaning in what you're saying. Let's talk about your next project, which has just been announced, about Gershwin. So we're coming up on an important milestone.
Yes, yes. Again, it's the cycles of history, you know. So in 2024, we'll celebrate the centenary of Rhapsody in Blue. What I've always loved about the piece is the way that Gershwin spoke about his vision for it. He called it a sort of a musical kaleidoscope of America. And he's thinking about the melting pot when he's writing this piece.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get it right. A sort of a musical kaleidoscope of America, our vast melting pot, our unduplicated national pep, our metropolitan madness. He's really trying to capture the life of his city and his time in 1924. About a year ago, I met a composer named Edmar Colon, Puerto Rican composer. We were both working on a project with the Boston Pops, and Edmar did this amazing arrangement of Duke Ellington's Caravan. We brought in all this, you know, Afro-Caribbean percussion, really took the piece back to its roots. So I thought, what if we imagine Gershwin's vision of this musical kaleidoscope, but translate that to today? You know, all of these sounds of the music that has come into this country with waves and waves of immigration. So we started on that journey, and then I started doing my research, and I learned that in 1924, 3 months after Gershwin is celebrating the melting pot, the Johnson-Reed Act was passed, which was this horribly fascist piece of legislation that really shut down immigration. It was an overt effort to enforce white supremacy in this country. That act, for weird reasons, left this kind of loophole for immigrants from the British West Indies, because they were British colonies at that point. That meant that all these people started coming from Jamaica and the islands. My grandfather came in 1924 from Jamaica. So we're just reimagining Gershwin's world, Afro-Caribbean sounds, music from Asia, from Latin America, from really just all over the world, and building this completely new orchestration.
And finally, Laura, zooming out with everything that you've been describing, you've had projects that encompass these incredibly challenging subjects of change in the world, change in people. Having navigated all of this, do you feel like there's been some change in yourself? Anything that has surprised you along your journey that perhaps wasn't there before you took it all on?
I think I'm surprised every day. I think as musicians, we live such a long life in our work. I can't think of any other calling or profession or whatever you want to call it that you start when you're 4 years old and you may finish, on your deathbed. It's a really energizing way to live. It makes me so happy to kind of get up in the morning and think about what am I going to do today. And also, who do I get to share this with? Who's going to find this and learn something and change themselves? Yeah.
Lara, thank you so much for joining us here. It was a delight to have this conversation with you. Thanks for making us hopeful.
Thank you.
Yeah,
This has been
thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thanks.